Imagine walking into a car dealership on a Tuesday afternoon. You've got the money sitting in your bank account. Your credit score? Pristine. You're ready to drive home in a brand new car. But there's a problem. The lot is practically empty. Just one sad-looking sedan sitting there with a price tag that makes your eyes water. A markup so ridiculous it costs more than your first year of college tuition. Supply chain issues, the salesman tells you with a tired shrug. But what does that actually mean? It means a factory in Malaysia had a power outage 3 weeks ago. It means a ship the size of the Empire State Building got wedged sideways in a canal in Egypt. It means 2 politicians on opposite sides of the world decided they're no longer on speaking terms. And somehow, that affects whether you can buy a Honda Civic in Toledo, Ohio. For 30 years we lived in a beautiful fantasy. We believed the world was flat. That borders were just lines on a map. That you could build a smartphone using parts from 12 different countries, assemble it in a 13th, and sell it in a 14th without a single problem. We called it globalization. It gave us cheap t-shirts, $500 4K TVs, avocados in December. But I'm here to tell you, the party's over. The bartenders are turning on the lights. The music has stopped. And the geopolitical hangover is just beginning. Welcome to the era of deglobalization. Welcome to the era of trade blocks. And if you thought inflation was bad before, buckle up. Because we haven't seen anything yet. Today we're not just talking about money. We're talking about the complete reorganization of the global economic architecture. And whether you realize it or not, it's already changing your life. To understand where we're going, we need to understand what we're leaving behind. For the longest time, specifically from the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 up until roughly 2016, we lived in what economists call the golden age of hyperglobalization. There was this incredible arrogance. This idea popularized by political scientist Francis Fukuyama called the end of history. The concept was simple and seductive. Liberal democracy and free market capitalism had won. The Cold War was over. Ideology was dead. We'd figured it out. War between major powers was now obsolete because, well, why would you bomb a country that makes your sneakers? This was the McDonald's theory of peace. No 2 countries with a McDonald's franchise would ever go to war with each other. After all, if you're both enjoying Big Macs and participating in global supply chains, you're too economically entangled to fight. Yeah, that didn't age well. But for 3 glorious decades, it seemed to be working. Companies could outsource anything to anywhere. Toyota perfected just-in-time manufacturing. Apple could design a phone in California, source components from dozens of countries, assemble it in China, and ship it worldwide, all coordinated with clockwork precision. World trade as a share of global GDP soared. Hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of poverty. The global middle class exploded. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The 2008 financial crisis was the first warning sign that the system was more fragile than we thought. Brexit in 2016 signaled that not everyone was winning from globalization. Trump's election and his aggressive trade war with China marked a fundamental shift in American policy. And then came the pandemic. COVID-19 didn't just expose the weaknesses in our global supply chains, it shattered the illusion that the system was resilient. Suddenly we couldn't get masks, or ventilators, or toilet paper. We discovered that 80% of our antibiotics came from China. We realized that one factory shutting down in Wuhan could bring the entire world to its knees. And then, Russia invaded Ukraine. Europe learned the hard way that relying on an authoritarian regime for 55% of your natural gas wasn't a business strategy, it was a suicide pact. Today the world is fracturing. We're seeing a retreat from the open ocean of global trade into distinct, fortified blocks. You've got the US-aligned bloc, the China-aligned bloc, and a bunch of countries in the middle trying to play both sides to get the best deal on oil and semiconductors. This isn't just about politics. It's about why your refrigerator costs more, why your job might be moving, and why the next 10 years are going to look nothing like the last 30. To understand why globalization is dying, you first have to understand the religion that ruled corporate boardrooms for 40 years. It was called just-in-time manufacturing. Here's the scene. It's 1995. You're an executive at a major manufacturing company. You walk through your warehouse and see stacks of tires, boxes of microchips, piles of steel sitting there. And all you can think is, that's not inventory. That's wasted money. That's cash sitting on a floor, collecting dust, earning nothing. So you hire a consultant. This consultant looks at you over his rimless glasses and says, why store parts? Why not have the truck deliver those tires exactly 4 hours before they're bolted onto the car? This was the Toyota production system. It was brilliant. It was efficient. It squeezed every ounce of profit out of the supply chain. Companies stopped keeping inventory. Warehouses were sold off and turned into trendy loft apartments. The entire global economy became a tightly wound clock where a part made in Shenzhen on Monday would arrive in Los Angeles on Wednesday and be in a customer's hands by Friday. It was a masterpiece of logistics. But here's the dark reality of efficiency. Efficiency is the enemy of resilience. When you strip away all the fat, you lose all the cushion. Just-in-time works perfectly, as long as nothing goes wrong. As long as the world is perfect. As long as ships don't get stuck. As long as pandemics don't happen. As long as factories never lose power. Then came the 2020s. The decade where Murphy's Law went into overdrive. Remember the Ever Given? That massive container ship that decided to do a drift maneuver in the Suez Canal and got stuck sideways? That one boat held up $60 billion worth of trade per week. It stopped toilet paper, coffee, and, crucially, garden gnomes from reaching Europe. Because of JIT, nobody had backup stock. When one link in the chain broke, the whole machine seized up. Or look at the great semiconductor famine of 2021. Car manufacturers like Ford and GM had spent decades outsourcing chip production to East Asia, specifically to TSMC in Taiwan. They kept zero inventory because, again, inventory is waste. When the pandemic hit, car companies canceled their chip orders, thinking nobody would buy cars during a lockdown. But everyone sat at home with their stimulus checks and bought PlayStations and laptops instead. The chip foundries switched to making chips for Sony and Apple. When the car companies came back 6 months later and said, "Okay, we're ready for our chips now," the foundries said, "Take a number. The wait time is 52 weeks. You had billions of dollars worth of finished trucks, sitting in parking lots, gathering dust, because they were missing a $2 chip. That is the catastrophic failure of just-in-time. So what's replacing it? We're moving to just-in-case. Corporate boardrooms are terrified. They don't care about squeezing the last cent of efficiency anymore. They care about security, about reliability, about making sure the product actually exists when they need it. They're building massive warehouses again. They're hoarding parts. They're friendshoring, moving factories from potential adversaries like China to friendly neighbors like Mexico and Vietnam. They're reshoring, bringing production back home to Arizona and Texas and Ohio, even though it costs more. And make no mistake, this is a massive inflationary pressure. Keeping inventory? Costs money. Building new factories in Arizona instead of Guangdong? Costs money. Paying American wages instead of Vietnamese wages? Costs money. And guess who pays that cost? You do. The consumer does. The era of the $10 toaster is dying because the supply chain that made it, a chain that relied on perfect peace, zero friction, and just-in-time precision, is gone forever. If you want to pinpoint the exact moment globalization died, I can give you a date. It wasn't when Russia invaded Ukraine. It wasn't Brexit. It wasn't even the pandemic. It was October 7, 2022. On that Friday afternoon, while most Americans were thinking about the weekend, the U.S. Bureau of Industry and Security, a boring name for a terrifying organization, effectively declared economic war on China's technology sector. They didn't use missiles. They didn't use sanctions on banks. They used a 139-page document. This document banned the export of the world's most advanced semiconductors, and crucially the machines used to make them, to China. This brings us to a concept you need to tattoo on your brain: weaponized interdependence. For decades, we were told that if we all traded with each other, we'd be too busy making money to fight. This was the Golden Arches theory of conflict prevention. But scholars like Henry Farrell and Abraham Newman looked at the global economic network and realized something darker. The network isn't a flat web. It's a hub-and-spoke system. And if you control the hub, you can strangle the spokes. Here's the perfect example: ASML. You've probably never heard of Veldhoven, a quiet town in the Netherlands. But it's arguably the most important place in the modern world. Is the headquarters of ASML, the only company on Earth, literally a monopoly, that builds extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. These machines are the size of a bus. They cost $200 million. They use lasers to vaporize microscopic droplets of tin 50,000 times per second to create light hotter than the surface of the sun. This light prints circuits so small they're measured in nanometers, close to the size of individual atoms. Without ASML's machines, you cannot make an iPhone 15. You cannot make an NVIDIA H100 AI chip. You cannot run a modern military. You cannot build advanced weapons systems. You cannot compete in artificial intelligence. China knows this. The US knows this. And on October 7, 2022, the US pulled the kill switch. They pressured the Netherlands and Japan to stop selling these machines to China. More recently, in 2024, they went even further, banning not just new sales, but also the servicing and maintenance of ASML machines already in China. Think about what this means. You're a Chinese tech executive. You wake up one morning and realize that your multi-billion-dollar factory full of cutting-edge equipment will slowly degrade and die because you can't get spare parts. You can't get software updates. And you certainly can't buy new models. You're effectively watching your entire industry die in slow motion, and there's nothing you can do about it. According to recent reports, ASML sold 70% of its DUV lithography systems to Chinese entities in 2024, a last-minute rush before tighter restrictions kicked in. China's share of ASML's revenue jumped from 26% in 2023 to 36% in 2024 as Chinese companies stockpiled equipment before the door slammed shut. This completely destroyed the trust that globalization requires. If the United States can turn off your tech sector with the stroke of a pen because they don't like your foreign policy, why would you ever rely on American technology again? You wouldn't. You'd build your own. And that's exactly what's happening. China is pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into building its own semiconductor industry. In January 2025, reports emerged that Chinese scientists had built a prototype EUV lithography machine in a secret lab in Shenzhen. Western experts are skeptical. They note the machine hasn't produced a single working chip yet, and may not be viable until 2030. But the intent is clear. China will not accept permanent technological subordination. We're seeing the splintering of hardware. A Chinese tech stack and a Western tech stack. Incompatible. Hostile. And eye-wateringly expensive. The age of one global technology standard is over. So if we can't trust global supply chains, and we can't trust our rivals for technology or energy, what do? Simple, we bribe companies to come home. Welcome to the return of industrial policy. For 40 years, industrial policy was a dirty word in Western capitals. The government wasn't supposed to pick winners and losers. The free market was supposed to decide. If the market decided that making solar panels in China was 20% cheaper, so be it. That era is dead and buried. Enter the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. Despite the name, this has very little to do with inflation and everything to do with economic warfare. The US government essentially backed up a dump truck full of cash, $369 billion and likely much more, to the doors of companies and said, if you build your batteries here, if you mine your lithium here, if you assemble your electric vehicles here, we will pay you. And it's working. Massive factories are springing up in Ohio, Arizona, and Georgia. TSMC is building a $40 billion semiconductor fab in Arizona. Battery plants are popping up across the Midwest. The Rust Belt is seeing a manufacturing renaissance. But here's the catch. When the US started handing out free money, Europe panicked. They said, hey, that's unfair. You're sucking all the investment out of Europe with your subsidies. So the EU launched their own subsidies, hundreds of billions in the European Chips Act and Green Deal Industrial Plan. Then South Korea launched subsidies. Then Japan. Then India. And China, which has been doing this for decades, doubled down even harder. We are now in a full-blown subsidy arms race. Every major power is spending billions of taxpayer dollars to duplicate supply chains that already exist. We're building chip factories in the Arizona desert where there's not enough water. We're building battery plants in the German Rust Belt where energy is expensive. Why is this a problem? Because it's incredibly inefficient. Instead of one global factory making widgets for $1, we now have 5 national factories making widgets for $3. And you're paying for this inefficiency twice. First, as a taxpayer, your tax money is funding these massive corporate subsidies. Second, as a consumer, the end product is more expensive because it wasn't made in the most efficient place. It was made in the most politically convenient place. We are actively dismantling the efficiency of the global market to buy national security. It's like buying insurance on your house. Except the insurance premium costs as much as the house itself. Now, to be fair, there's a logic to this. National security isn't free. The ability to produce semiconductors, batteries, and critical materials domestically means you're not hostage to geopolitical rivals. When Taiwan is under constant threat from China, having a backup semiconductor supply makes sense. But let's not pretend this doesn't come with massive costs. According to research by the IMF, fragmentation into trading blocks with higher barriers to foreign investment could reduce long-term global GDP by 2%. That might not sound like much, but in a $100 trillion global economy, that's $2 trillion of lost wealth. Every single year. The discount is over. We're paying full price now. While the US and Europe are busy building subsidy fortresses, the rest of the world isn't just sitting around waiting for permission to trade. They're building their own clubhouse. Enter BRICS Plus. For years, Western economists laughed at BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They called it a talking shop. Just a photo opportunity for leaders who wanted to complain about America. But after the West froze Russia's foreign currency reserves in 2022, deleting $300 billion with the stroke of a pen, the laughter stopped. The Global South saw what happened to Russia and thought, if the United States can delete Russia's money with a keystroke, what stops them from doing it to us? The result? A massive rush to de-risk from the dollar. Now let's be realistic. The US dollar isn't dying tomorrow. It's still the king, accounting for about 58% of global foreign exchange reserves. But the king's throne is getting shakier. We're seeing the rise of fragmented currency blocks. China is increasingly paying for Saudi oil in yuan. India initially tried paying for Russian oil in rupees but, constrained by trade imbalances, pivoted to using UAE dirhams and Chinese yuan to bypass the dollar entirely. It's a geopolitical barter system on steroids. Want Russian oil but can't pay in dollars because of sanctions? Pay in yuan. Or rupees. Or gold. Whatever works. And that brings us to the real smoking gun: gold. Central banks around the world are buying gold at a pace we haven't seen since the 1960s. China's central bank has been a particularly aggressive buyer. Why? Because gold is the only money that isn't someone else's liability. The US can't sanction a gold bar sitting in your own vault in Shanghai. You can't freeze it. You can't seize it. It just sits there glittering and inert, a perfect store of value in an unreliable world. This is the definition of a fracturing world. We're moving from a system of one world, one currency, to a system of my block, my rules. Visualize a world where your credit card works in New York and London, but gets declined in Beijing or Mumbai because the payment processors no longer talk to each other. It sounds dystopian, but we're already halfway there. Chinese tourists can't use Visa or MasterCard in many places in China. They use Alipay or WeChat Pay. Russian banks were cut off from SWIFT. The financial plumbing of globalization is being ripped apart. And here's the thing, this fragmentation makes everyone poorer. When money can't flow freely, when you need multiple currencies to do business, when payment systems don't talk to each other, friction increases. And friction is expensive. Here's the dirty secret of Globalization 1.0. It wasn't just about free trade. It was about free labor. Specifically, it was about the integration of hundreds of millions of young, cheap Chinese workers into the global economy. In the 1990s and 2000s, we got used to the idea that there was an infinite supply of humans willing to assemble iPhones for $2 an hour. Well, I have bad news for anyone hoping for a return to cheap consumer goods. We ran out of people. China is currently facing the fastest demographic collapse in human history outside of war or plague. China's population officially started shrinking in 2023. By 2050, they will lose a population the size of the entire United States, roughly 300 million people. This is what economists call the Lewis turning point, the moment when surplus labor runs out and wages skyrocket. Made in China is no longer cheap. Chinese factory wages have tripled in the last decade. Companies are running to Vietnam, India, and Mexico looking for the new China. But here's the kicker, there is no new China. Vietnam has only 100 million people. It's too small to replace China's 1.4 billion. India has the people, 1.4 billion and growing, but lacks the infrastructure, the reliable power grid, and the government coordination that made China's rise possible. Mexico is great for manufacturing, destined for the US market. But its labor costs are rising fast too. What does this mean for you? It means the era of deflationary globalization is over. For 30 years, cheap labor subsidized your lifestyle. It kept inflation down even when governments printed trillions of dollars. That subsidy is gone. In the future, your products won't be made by a cheap worker. They'll be made by an expensive robot. And robots have high upfront costs. We're entering a world where labor is scarce. Where power shifts back to workers, leading to higher wages, which is great if you're a worker, but also means higher prices on the shelf. The China price is dead. Long live the inflation price. We've talked about tech wars and energy wars. Now let's talk about the climate trade war that nobody's paying attention to yet, but will dominate headlines in the coming years. You might think environmental policy is about saving polar bears and reducing emissions. And sure, partly it is. But in the world of geopolitics, everything is a weapon. Enter the CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. That's a fancy Brussels bureaucrat term for a massive tax on imports. Here's how it works. The European Union has strict environmental rules. European factories have to pay for carbon permits, making production expensive. Meanwhile, making steel in India or Turkey is cheaper because they don't have the same restrictions. They just pollute. So the EU says, if you want to sell your dirty steel in Europe, you have to pay a carbon tax at the border to equalize the price with our clean steel. On paper, this is about climate change. In reality, it's protectionism wrapped in a green bow. And it's spreading. The UK is implementing similar measures. The United States is considering carbon tariffs. This effectively splits the world into two zones. The high-cost green zone, that's the West, and the low-cost dirty zone, that's everyone else. If you're a developing country, you're furious. You view this as green imperialism. You're trying to industrialize. Trying to lift your people out of poverty the same way Europe and America did. And now the rich countries who already polluted their way to wealth are pulling up the ladder and taxing you for trying to climb it. This creates massive friction. It kills trade deals. It forces supply chains to reorganize not based on efficiency or comparative advantage, but on carbon accounting. The World Trade Organization, the supposed referee of global trade, is powerless to stop it. The WTO rules say you can't discriminate against imports based on how they're produced. The CBAM says, watch me. We're moving toward green blocks. If you want to trade with the West, you have to adopt their environmental standards. If you can't afford that, if you're a poor country that needs cheap coal to industrialize, you trade with China or Russia who don't ask as many questions. The irony? This fragmentation might actually slow down global growth, making it harder to pay for the green transition in the first place. We're caught in a trap of our own making. We've talked about physical goods, oil, chips, steel. But there's one more frontier that's shattering before our eyes. The internet itself. For 2 decades, we believed in one web, a global digital commons where a kid in Rio could watch the same cat video as a kid in Tokyo. Where information flowed freely across borders. Where the internet was truly worldwide. That dream is dead. We are now living in the age of the splinternet. It started with China's Great Firewall blocking Google, Facebook, and Twitter. We used to think that was just a China thing, an authoritarian outlier. But now everyone's doing it. Europe has GDPR, effectively creating a data border around the EU. Companies face massive fines for mishandling European data, forcing them to store it locally. Russia created Runet, an internal internet they can unplug from the world in seconds if they need to. And the United States is actively trying to ban TikTok, a Chinese-owned app used by 150 million Americans. This isn't about dancing teenagers. It's about data sovereignty. Governments have realized that data is the new oil. They don't want their citizens' data flowing to servers in a rival country where it could be accessed by foreign intelligence services or used to train foreign AI models. What does this mean for business? It means the death of the global product launch. If you're a tech startup today, you can't just build one app and launch it worldwide. You have to build one version for the US. One version for the EU that complies with strict privacy laws, and a completely separate version for China, if you're even allowed in at all. This fragments innovation. It makes everything more expensive. It stops ideas from spreading. The World Wide Web is becoming the worldwide walled garden. We're drifting toward a future where your digital passport, your IP address, your citizenship, determines what reality you see online. Your internet will be different from mine. And neither of us will be able to access the whole picture. So we've looked at dying supply chains, tech wars, energy crises, demographics, subsidies, and digital walls. When you add all these pieces together, they spell one word: inflation. This is the most important takeaway of this entire video. For 30 years, globalization acted as a massive deflationary force. It allowed Western countries to suppress wages and prices by arbitraging labor costs and ignoring national borders. You could pay a worker in Vietnam a fraction of what you'd pay in Ohio, and pocket the difference. Deglobalization is inherently inflationary. Think about it. Building 2 factories instead of 1 costs more. Shipping energy as LNG instead of pipeline gas costs more. Paying American wages instead of Vietnamese wages costs more. Holding just-in-case inventory instead of just-in-time costs more. Complying with multiple regulatory systems instead of one costs more. We're moving from an economy optimized for efficiency to an economy optimized for security. And security is expensive. Central banks can raise interest rates all they want, but interest rates can't print more workers. Interest rates can't build a chip factory in Arizona overnight. Interest rates can't make Russia sell gas to Germany again. We're likely entering a period of structural inflation. The days of steady 2% inflation that central banks loved are probably behind us. We're looking at a more volatile, more expensive world. According to the IMF and other institutions tracking these trends, increased trade restrictions, which jumped from about 1,000 annually in 2019 to over 3,000 in 2023, are already having measurable effects on global prices. This doesn't mean the world is ending. It doesn't mean we're going back to the Stone Age. It means the discount is over. We have to pay the full price for our lifestyle now. No more subsidies from Chinese workers. No more free rides on Pax Americana. No more assuming ships can sail anywhere without being attacked by drones. The bill has come due. So where does this leave us? Is globalization dead? Not entirely. We're not going back to the Middle Ages. We're not going to stop trading completely. You'll still buy bananas from Ecuador and watch anime from Japan and drive a car with parts from multiple continents. But the hyper-globalization of the 1990s, the idea that the world was becoming one big, happy, borderless marketplace, is dead. It has been replaced by what we might call reglobalization, or fragmentation, or the new multipolarity. We are retreating into blocks. The democratic bloc, United States, European Union, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and other liberal democracies. These countries share democratic values, have similar regulatory frameworks, and generally trust each other's legal systems. The authoritarian bloc, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. These countries are united not by ideology necessarily, but by opposition to Western dominance and a willingness to work together when it suits their interests. The transactional bloc, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Indonesia, and others. These are countries playing the middle, maintaining relationships with both sides, extracting concessions, trying to maximize their own national interests without fully committing to either team. Trade will continue to happen within these blocs. It will be much more difficult between them. And when it does happen between blocs, it will be more expensive, more regulated, more politically fraught. This is a more dangerous world. A world where economic rivals are also military rivals. A world where a trade war can escalate into a shooting war much faster than we'd like to admit. We're already seeing this dynamic play out with tensions over Taiwan, the South China Sea, Ukraine, and the Middle East. But here's the silver lining, and yes, there is one. This chaos creates opportunity. For decades we ignored our own backyards. We let our industrial bases rot because it was cheaper to import everything. We became dependent on fragile supply chains stretching halfway around the world. Now we're forced to rebuild. Forced to innovate. Forced to value resilience over quick profits. Forced to invest in our own communities, our own workers, our own industries. The United States is seeing a manufacturing renaissance. Real wages for blue-collar workers are rising for the first time in decades as labor becomes scarce. Investment in infrastructure, semiconductors, and clean energy is at levels we haven't seen since the 1960s. Europe is being forced to invest in energy independence, building LNG terminals and renewable energy at a breakneck pace. This will hurt in the short term. Energy is more expensive, but in the long term they'll be more secure. Emerging economies like India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Mexico are becoming the new manufacturing hubs, creating millions of jobs and building middle classes. Innovation hasn't stopped. If anything, it's accelerating. But instead of one path forward, we now have multiple competing visions of how to build the future. Sometimes competition breeds excellence. It's going to be messy. It's going to be expensive. And it's going to be a wild ride. The end of history is over. History is back. And it has a lot of catching up to do. If you made it this far, you're clearly the kind of person who wants to understand the machine, not just live inside it. If this video gave you an existential crisis about the future of the global economy, or at least helped you understand why your car costs so much, do me a favor. First, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that deep, thoughtful content deserves to be seen. Second, subscribe. We're diving deep into economics, geopolitics, and the forces shaping our world. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Third, comment below. Tell me, are you changing how you invest, save, or think about your career based on this deglobalized future? Are you worried? Optimistic? Somewhere in between? I read every comment in the first hour. The world is changing faster than at any point in our lifetimes. Understanding these forces, trade, technology, geopolitics, demographics, isn't just interesting. It's essential. Because whether you're investing for retirement, choosing a career, or just trying to understand why everything feels different now, these are the forces that will shape the next 30 years. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next one.